Where's he going?
New York.
Manhattan.
Yeah.
That's what he told me.
I said, they must be paying you big bucks to go up there.
Yeah, no doubt.
See, a different
It'll
world.
cost big bucks to live up there.
Yeah, up there.
That's true.
Right.
Him and I think a guy he met in Tuscaloosa's dad's kind of putting him up in a place. I think Trent Kilpatrick's up there with him. So we'll have 3 guys.
Wow.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I don't know some folks.
Just lodging is quite expensive.
Yeah. Woo, up there. That's great.
All right. Good morning. All right. Greg, will you lead us in a prayer, please?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you now to thank you for this day that you've given us and the opportunities of it. Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity we have come and study your word and later today worship you. Dear Lord, thank you for everything good that you give us because we know that comes through you. Forgive us when we sin. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen.
All right. Continue with our thoughts on faith. This morning we'll look at some causes of unbelief. And again, this is notes that I've taken from a book called Rock Solid Faith by Bert Thompson. All people believe in something. What makes people believe the way they do? Why do people believe the way they do in whatever it is?
A lot of times they're brought up that
Brought
way.
up that way.
Brought up that way?
Way it's raised.
And I made 15 copies this morning. I was hoping I'd be one short. It could still happen, who knows?
That's right.
Why do people choose not to believe in God and even go so far as to fight against those who do believe in Him? It kind of doesn't make sense. Why would you be concerned about something that doesn't exist? I've never understood that. It doesn't make sense at all. But to a lot of people, somehow it does. There are several reasons we're going to cover, hopefully this morning, as to why people don't believe. And you start out there, number A, bias against God. It's a plain old bias against God. An unbeliever likes to be an unbeliever. James D. Bale said concerning Charles Darwin, he said, for some reason or another, Darwin was determined not to believe in God, although he admitted more than once that it is reasonable to believe in God and unreasonable to reject God. Yet so determined was he not to believe that he slew reason when reason led him to God. Now listen to what Charles Darwin said. Darwin says, but then arises the doubt. Can the mind of man, which has, as I fully believe, been developed from a mind as low as that possessed by the lowest animals, be trusted when it draws such grand conclusions? So he's lowering the mind of man to that of an animal and saying that we can't think. How can we come to the conclusion of a creator of all things? How can we come to the conclusion that there is a God? Darwin doubted what he believed. And he was so biased against God that when his own reasoning led him to God, he forsook that reasoning.
Okay, so he took a position that said there was no God and everybody, and so he's in that, and then he sees reasoning that he should probably change his mind, but he's already gone so far that he says, I can't go back. Okay.
And we're going to talk a little more about Darwin off and on throughout the morning, but yeah, you're exactly right. Darwin also said, well, this is exactly what you were just talking about. Darwin said, but I found it more and more difficult, with free scope given to my imagination, to invent evidence that would suffice to convince me. Thus disbelief crept over me at such a slow rate, but at last it was complete. And the rate was so slow that I felt no distress. It's basically what you were just saying.
Weight gains like that too.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But one morning you wake up and say, how'd I get this way?
That's right.
He never did that.
Yeah.
He never did that. James D. Bale said, it was only when reason led Darwin to God that he destroyed reason. What a strong bias against God he must have had. How does the Bible describe people such as Darwin? Think about it. There's one word. Fool. Psalm 14 verse 1 says,
Who has said in his heart
there is no God. Now, how do we use that word fool? We use that word fool to describe a diminished intellect. But that's not the way it's used. That's not the way the psalmist used it. It carries the connotation of a moral and religious judgment. That's the fool that the psalmist speaks of. But bias against God is one of the chief causes of unbelief. And number B, parents and upbringing. You ever heard that phrase, no man is an island? What is meant by that? No man is an island.
No man's alone.
Nobody's alone. That's on the right track. What thoughts can go along with that? Nobody's an island.
Everybody has some sort of support system.
Everybody has some kind of support system. Shelby wouldn't know what to do if I didn't go buy her stuff. Everybody's got some kind of... Even, who was it? Howard Hughes. Billionaire. But he died a lonely life because he spent the last, I forget how many years of his life, secluded in one room, and as I understand it, he never left. But he had to depend on somebody. How did he depend on other people? So he had to bring his food.
Well, somebody had service probably.
Yeah, no man is an island. Romans 14 verse 7, Paul says, for none of us live to himself and no one dies to himself. I mean, we're all intermingled with somebody else in some way. People are influenced by other people, and especially in the parent-child relationship. Parents have, or mothers and fathers have, an initial influence on their children, but even after they're grown, there's still an influence that continues on their children. I read an article, it was a long time ago, that before a child enters the first grade, during those 5 to 6 years, I believe it was something between 80 and 85% of his or her learning comes from
Mom and Dad.
who?
Mom and Dad.
No,
being at home.
you're half right.
Oh, Mom.
Mom. 80 to 85% of their learning before age 6 comes from mom. And mom carries that influence. Now, a lot of it comes from dad, but the bulk of it comes from mom. Somebody once said that a child's mind is like Jell-O. Think about that for a second. What's the child's mind compared to Jell-O?
Orange, whatever, loaf.
Okay? But what if you sprinkle some sand in that Jell-O while it's still wet? You're not going to get it out after it sets. So the idea of a child mind being like Jell-O, you got to put the good stuff in before it becomes set. I wish I had come up with that thought. Proper influence and upbringing is accomplished by 3 things. Number 1, instruction. Number 2, discipline. Number 3, exemplary behavior. Now, 3 passages I want to read very quickly. First, coming from Ephesians chapter 6. verse 4. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Fathers have that command to instruct their children, to bring them up in a certain way, according to Paul's writing. Number 2 is discipline. Proverbs chapter 29. Proverbs 29 and verse 15. The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Y'all have heard that old saying? Spare the what and what? Spare the rod, spoil the child. Those exact words I've never read in Scripture, but the concept is certainly there. There's another passage in Proverbs, I can't think of exactly what it is right now, that if you beat him with a rod, he will not die, but rather you will save his soul from hell. That discipline is necessary, according to Scripture. 1 Peter chapter 3. Peter specifically is talking about the influence of the wife over the husband here, but this same idea can be applied to parents over the children, or children over parents, anybody over anybody. 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2, wives, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their lives when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Actions speak louder than words. Proper influence accomplished by exemplary behavior. So instruction, discipline, and exemplary behavior. But think about this. If accurate instructions, timely discipline, and a proper example, coupled with faithfulness, can produce good results, then what results might inaccurate instruction, lack of discipline, improper example, coupled with unfaithfulness produce? I mean, you're going to the extreme on one side to the extreme on the other. All right, number C, education. One of the most important causes of unbelief relates to the kind of education a person receives. Children have been taught for decades, and I remember reading this, studying this in second, third grade, way back at Farmers Capital. They've been taught that they have been evolved from animals. They have not been taught that they were created in God's image. And this evolution has been beat down on our children for generations now. And it's really starting to take root, it seems like. Evolutionist Edward O. Wilson from Harvard said, when I was 15, I entered the Southern Baptist Church with great fervor and interest in the fundamentalist religion. I left at 17 when I got to the University of Alabama and heard about evolutionary theory. Kind of reminds me of that movie, God's Not Dead. You see that? And that young college student takes on the atheist professor and proves scientifically there is a God. Chet Ramo, professor of physics and astronomy at Stonehill College in Massachusetts, said, I learned something in my study of science, something that had an even greater effect upon my religious faith. None of the miracles I had been offered in my religious training were as impressively revealing of God's power as the facts I was learning in science. It's kind of like this wave of science is coming by and washing people's faith away. And you go back to Matthew chapter 7, the wise man built his house on the rock, the foolish man built his house on the sand. And the rains came and the wind blew, beat on that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. I mean, you can just picture that with statements like what Chet Ramos makes. Science has had so many successes in so many areas, it's gained a lot of respect, even and especially in the area of evolution. It has become commonplace, it has become natural to accept what the experts say. Think about that. I mean, if you don't accept what the experts say, then you're like a nobody. A few months ago, Richard Dawkins died. And before that time, he was the authority on evolution. He was the authority on the cosmos and explaining how it got here. But even he had a grain of doubt somewhere. I can't remember the quote that he made, but he revealed that he had a grain of doubt somewhere. But it's become natural to accept what the experts say. And if you don't accept what they say, then you're not that important. One writer said, the main reason most educated people believe in evolution is simply because they have been told that most educated people believe in evolution. If you want to be educated, you've got to believe this away. But the fact is that a truth is not determined by who follows it or by how many follow it. Guy N. Woods said it's dangerous to follow a multitude because the majority is almost always on the wrong side in this world. And Moses wrote in Exodus 23 verse 2, you shall not follow a crowd to do evil. And there's a whole lot of that going on. I mean, it's common argument is, can this many scientists be wrong? Can this many people be wrong? Well, look at the Muslim faith. Can this many people be wrong? Yeah. Look at a lot of different things. Can this many people be wrong? Yeah, there's a lot of proof that this many people can be wrong. All right, number D, pride. As pride increases, our humility decreases, and as man finds himself self-sufficient, he will discard his religious convictions, or if he didn't have any religious convictions to start with, he will fight those who do. Proverbs chapter 16, verses 18 and 19. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. Pride is a scary thing, but it doesn't seem like it's a scary thing. That's what makes it so dangerous. What will pride cause you to do? It'll cause you to deny the truth. It'll cause you to deny those you love. It'll cause you to make decisions that you otherwise would not have made. It'll cause you to step on people to get to the top. And once it gets rolling, it's hard to stop. Bert Thompson said, what the prideful unbeliever may be thinking is, I've been an unbeliever for a long time now. And if I alter my views now, I will lose face. My reputation is linked to my views, and so is my conduct. Were I to change my mind, I would be condemning my whole past experience and altering my entire future life, both in word and deed. When pride takes over, it's hard for humility to come back in. And I believe that's one reason that so many people have left the church and refuse to come back, is because of that pride. They don't want to do away with the pride and replace it with humility. John 7 and verse 17. Jesus said, if anyone wills to do his will, he shall know concerning the doctrine whether it is from God or whether I speak on my own authority. If anyone wills to do his will, in other words, if a person desires, if he really wants to, he can replace unbelief with belief. It's one thing to let pride get in the way, and it's another thing to let it remain there. All right, number E, immorality. From Matthew chapter 5, 38 through 44. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Almost everything that Jesus did and taught was contradictory to the common practices of his day and of ours. I mean, where do you hear taught in the world that you should love your enemies? Where do you hear taught in the world that if you're compelled to do something for somebody, you take it just a little farther? You don't hear that anywhere, except in Christian teaching. In the world, it's almost non-existent. Those who are willing to participate in immoral acts often react in hostile fashion to those who are not. I mean, everybody, it's like they're trying to cover up. They're trying to defend the decisions they're making. They're trying to defend the way they live. There's such a hot debate going on, and this thing has been growing for decades about homosexuality. And it's such a hot topic right now. It's becoming commonplace. I remember a few years ago, I believe it was somewhere in North Alabama, there was I think it was a girl in high school who was refused access to her high school prom because she was a lesbian and she wanted to bring her girlfriend. And her mom was irate. Do you know why she was irate? She was angry, very angry, because the school wouldn't let her child in because she said she was lesbian. This girl was, I think, 15 or 16 years old. And she was mad. Mom was mad because the school wouldn't let her in. And I'm thinking, why is the mom mad because the school wouldn't let her in? And somebody else would say, why is mom should be mad because her daughter's a lesbian? I think it goes even more fundamental than that. Mom should be angry because the daughter apparently sexually active. Where did that argument go? Where did that go to? Fornication is commonplace. It's so popular and so accepted now. If you don't live with your future spouse first, then what's wrong with you? Number F, there is scientific materialism, another cause of unbelief. Bert Thompson, the author of this book, Rock Solid Faith, he said, let's face it, we're living in an era where science reigns supreme and where we view daily its astonishing accomplishments. Today, citizens of the most civilized country are better fed, better clothed, and healthier than they've ever seen. Science has increased lifespans, improved planetary transportation, and altered forever methods of global communication. It has eradicated smallpox and is on the verge of eliminating polio. Scientific research has improved radically such things as educational, medical, and recreational facilities, especially when compared to those of previous generations. It even stands at the brink of decoding the entire human genome. Bert Thompson was, I don't know how to describe it, he was fantastic at human DNA from a Christian perspective. Science has become, and this is what he explained, science has become the sacred cow in the laboratory, has become the holy of holies. Material contentment often makes for spiritual indifference. Number G, intellectual intimidation. From a letter to Bert Thompson from a graduate student who regarded his professor as, quote, a giant in his field, rocket scientist intelligence, and a devout evolutionist. Now this is what he wrote in the letter. He said, working this closely with one who thinks as he does is beginning to cause not a small amount of cognitive dissonance in my own mind. Hundreds of thousands of scientists can't be wrong, can they? Consensual validation cannot be pushed aside in science. How can that many people be following a flag with no carrier and not find out? I do not want to be a fool. In other words, what we read earlier, if educated people are going to accept evolution and you want to be educated, then you also have to accept evolution. Richard Dawkins says it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to be in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that. That's Richard Dawkins' quote. What puzzles me, I wrote this down on a piece of paper, and I want to make sure I get my thoughts straight on this. Maybe I can do it quickly. Dawkins wants to recognize something as wicked. Something is wicked. Evil. If there's something evil, then there also has to be something good, not evil. All right? Who sets the standard for what is good? Who set the standard for what is good? God did. Take God out of it. If we did just all appear here from a big bang, whatever, then what is good and what is evil, with no standard set by an authority, is simply a matter of opinion. Renee, I could come into your house and rob you and kill your husband and take anything I want, and it's perfectly okay. Because in my mind, my opinion, it's perfectly okay to do that. But in your opinion, it's not okay to do that. And I'm not going to do that, I promise. But without the standard that God has set forth, everything is just a matter of opinion. And it's almost comical that Richard Dawkins would say that if you're not in evolution, then you're wicked. What is wicked? How do you define wicked without a standard?
Yeah, where did he come up with the idea of wicked if everything is just
Right.
here, scary?
Yeah. But the thing about Richard Dawkins is he is now a believer. He is absolutely a believer, 100%, no doubt about it. All right, truth is not determined by popular opinion or a majority vote. two good examples of this. I guess this guy was a doctor named Edward Jenner. He was scorned when he suggested that smallpox could be prevented by infecting people with a less virulent strain of the disease-causing organism. I mean, we do the same thing for the flu every year. You get injected with, or I don't. If I take a flu shot, I get the flu. So I don't take a flu shot. But by and large, people take a small dose or less virulent strain of the flu, if the prediction is right, to help prevent you from getting the flu. Well, he was ridiculed for suggesting this years ago. Another doctor from Australia, and I hope I pronounced his name right, Ignaz Semmelweis, he noticed a high mortality rate among surgical patients. And he suggested that the deaths resulted from surgeons washing neither their hands nor their instruments between patients. Can you imagine?
Oh, I didn't think that.
How come you're shaking your head? I ain't asked a question yet, see? Can you imagine going into surgery and the doctor coming in with dirty hands? No.
Cleaning the dirt and go.
A status in the field of science is no guarantee of the truth. And I'd never heard of these two guys. But I've heard of Richard Dawkins and Carl Sagan and a whole bunch of others. So status in the field of science is no guarantee of the truth. Matthew 7 and verse 14. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. There's proof in another way that status in the field of science is no guarantee of the truth. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning in verse 19. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For Jews request a sign and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. God saw this coming all along. From the beginning, before the beginning of time. He knew that there were going to be people who thought they were too smart to accept His creation. It reminds me of a story I read. There was some scientists, a group of scientists that were able to take dirt and created a human life. And I don't know what all ingredients they put with it, but they took dirt and they created human life with it. And they approached God and they said, see, we're as smart as you are now. We've taken the dust of the ground and created life just like you did. And God said, well, show me how. So they bent over to reach some dirt, and God said, you go get your own dirt. Go get your own dirt. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 3 and 4. But even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. The most intelligent people are often the least spiritual because the God of this world has blinded their minds. Number H, evil, pain, and suffering, another cause of unbelief. They say things like, if God is real and if God is so good, then why did this child have to suffer and die from leukemia? Charles Darwin's unbelief began when his oldest daughter died in 1851. Thomas Huxley, who was basically Charles Darwin's bulldog, 4-year-old son died in his arms from scarlet fever. Mark Twain became embittered against God when his favorite daughter, Susie, died in 1896. Ted Turner abandoned his belief in God when his sister died of leukemia and his father committed suicide. When he was a young boy, he led a prayer group and he planned to be a foreign missionary. There are laws of nature we all must adhere to. We adhere to all the laws of nature and not just the ones that are convenient for us. Who brought evil, pain, and suffering into the world? Somebody once said that the cause of all that is wrong with the earth is not godliness, but rather ungodliness. In Genesis 3:17, the curse was put upon man because of Adam and Eve's sin. A lot of scholars believe that the writer was talking only about the immediate aspect of the curse. But that curse reaches much farther. There's bad weather, there's disease, there's accidents. And if I read that passage right, cursed is the ground, and by the sweat of your brow you'll make a living. And I think I understand that to say, Adam, before this day you never sweated. You never got too hot, you never got too cold. But now you did this, you're going to sweat, you're going to live by your sweat, and so is everybody after you. That's part of that curse coming down. Pain in childbearing, another part of that curse that continues. Romans 8:19 and 20. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. The creation was subjected to frustration, or that futility, through not God, but man. And you can trace that all the way back to Adam and Eve and that tree they were forbidden to eat from. Why do we tend to equate suffering with evil? Why do we do that? Some suffering beneficial. I mean, if you have chest pains, what does that tell you?
You better go to the hospital.
You need to go to the hospital because you're probably having a heart attack. That kind of stuff, that's good. Pain tells us when something's wrong. It tells us when something needs to be corrected. There was a girl I went to high school with back at Buckhorn. Her name was Angela. She always in a wheelchair. Her legs didn't work. I don't know that she ever straightened her legs out. But she and her mom were in not a real bad car accident one day. Banged up the car pretty good. Angela's in the front seat, and I don't know if she was buckled in or not, but she wound up in the floorboard. All right? And she had no feeling in her legs, and it wasn't until 3 or 4 or 5 days later they took her to get x-rayed because her legs swelled up so much and found out it was broken. She didn't have the pain. She felt fine. But she didn't have that pain to tell her something's wrong. So it wasn't until later, when swelling came along, that they went and got it x-rayed and found out her leg was broken. Instead of blaming God because of evil and pain and suffering exist, we should rather turn to Him for strength, and let these tragedies remind us that this world was never intended to be our final home. Hebrew writer talks about that in Hebrews 11:13 through 16. All right, number I, there's misconduct of believers. Misconduct of believers. What's the difference in a hypocrite and somebody who stumbles? Maybe we know, maybe we not, maybe we don't know, but God knows the difference. Sometimes it's difficult for us to swallow the fact that sometimes our actions attribute toward unbelief. We all make mistakes at some time or another. Jim Baker was found guilty of fraud involving church funds. This was in the early 90s, I think, late 80s or something. And how did the media respond to that? They had a field day. Look at what those Christians do over there. And I know he wasn't a part of the Lord's church, but in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of the media, we're all one and the same. Try to imagine yourself as an unbeliever who not only doubts the system of belief, but also the God behind them. James E. Bale says the corruptions or shortcomings or the hypocrisy in the lives of some believers have been used to justify the rejection of Christianity. They are viewed as adequate samples of the faith, and since the samples are not good, the faith is viewed as bad. 1 Timothy 5:14. Therefore, I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the household, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. He's talking about those young widows marrying again. But the concept, the idea can be applied to every one of us. Don't give those on the outside the chance to talk bad about us, and be truthful. If they're going to talk bad about us, make sure it's a lie. When the unbeliever labels the believer as, I love this, I wish I could come up with this. When the unbeliever labels the believer as a hypocrite, that proves that the unbeliever is aware of a higher standard. I never thought about that. James Bales, a person is not a hypocrite because he is weak and fails at times in the struggle against evil. He's not a hypocrite because he never perfectly achieves a perfect standard of life. In fact, he would be a hypocrite if he claimed that he had arrived at perfection. One is not a hypocrite because he is inconsistent. One may not be aware of the contradiction in his life. He may not be conscious of a particular clash between his profession and his conduct. Because the tares and the wheat may look alike for a while, does not mean that the wheat is made up of tares. Because weeds spring up in a garden, does this mean they were planted by the gardener? All right. I want to stop there. There are two more we'll look at next week, Lord willing. The unjust acts committed by believers in the name of God and unbelief. But that... This book, Rock Solid Faith, it covers a lot of stuff like that, and he takes scholarly thoughts and scholarly data, and he brings it down to a level that even I can understand. But we'll talk some more about the causes of unbelief next week, Lord willing. And don't forget to drop your cards in the basket up front for Brady, unless you just don't like him no more.
I don't like it because it's legal.
Yeah, I know.
You know, not many people were talking to him at his going away party Wednesday night. So I told him, I said, you made the right move by moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll talk to him.
I know.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, people don't talk to you at your going away party. It was a
Maybe
good
they just wanted the
decision.
cookies.